Welcome to Unlearn, where we talk to industry leaders about unlearning how we go to market.
I'm Kelly Sarabin, and I run Tech Partner Enablement and Advocacy at HubSpot.
And I'm Asher Matthew, co-founder of Partnership Leaders.
The old ways of going to market are getting more expensive and less effective.
To thrive in an era of digital transformation, you have to go to market differently. Let's find out how. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Unlearn, and we have a new guest and same old Kelly with us. Just kidding. For the record, there were like a few jokes made before the podcast started, so I figure I start, with mine first, and I'm sure Kelly will have 5 more on me as the podcast goes. But Kristin, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm Kristin. I am I guess I'd say a growth marketer is my title. My official title is head of digital operations at UST currently, but I would say my whole career has been focused on growth marketing. So just over the last year, I've been more focused on the digital marketing side of things.
Super. Tell us what's top of mind for you. That's how we always kick these things off.
I mean, to be honest, it's really all about Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift because, I really want to know if they're dating. And I'm very invested. He is my tight end on my fantasy football team,
Nice.
and huge fan.
So funny. HubSpot has been talking about this internally, and I'm like, I am so out of the pop culture loop. I'm like, I have no idea who Travis is or what this is going on. But thank you for explaining. Now I'm looped in.
He's Taylor's bringing lots of new views to the NFL for sure. So it is kind of an interesting phenomenon. I mean, it really has taken over the world. So on a serious note,
her tour was sold out for every location,
Oh, yeah.
wasn't it?
Yeah, she is.
Well, here's the question then. Is there anything B2B companies who are looking for marketing strategies can learn from Taylor Swift?
That is a good, actually, that's a perfect lead into something that I've been really thinking about.
This is great.
Because, in B2B tech, I think that we fail to look at the consumer side of things enough. And, for sure, I think Taylor Swift, she's a fantastic marketer and has controlled every aspect of her brand for forever, but also really connects emotionally to her audience and in ways that we all need to do as marketers, right? So, that's an interesting segue. I mean, I spent a lot of years in consumer marketing and also sales and operations. And so in the B2B side of thing, it's interesting because marketers who are, B2B focused really rely on sales, it seems like. And they often forget about all of the selling you need to do in your marketing. And that seems to be really coming to a head right now, I think, with all the digital touch points that everybody has. And, decisions are made way before the sales team is ever contacted. And I think, especially B2B marketers really need to be thinking about that, the consumer experience. And, it's hard to sell in B2B from a marketing perspective, right? I mean, you're trying to inspire and build trust, and it's really long transactions. So, that is difficult. And so the people who really love consumer marketing probably don't end up in B2B, because it's frustrating and hard. And there's you get the rewards, very incrementally versus, with e-commerce or, any sort of, even a smaller tech company, it would be just a lot easier to find that satisfaction you get from selling.
What are some of the ways that you think that B2B marketers can kind of foster that emotional connection? Because I think that it's not baked into the playbooks. It's just viewed differently, and it's something consumer marketers do very well. I think it's been baked into their playbooks more from the get-go. Do you have any advice for B2B marketers who kind of understand the concept of, hey, businesses are made up of individual people and individual buyers with individual KPIs and goals? Um, because I agree with you too. I don't think there's a lot of switchover like you, people who go from consumer to B2B. You mostly see people spending their whole career on one side of the table. But the buying journey for the business has become more digital. It has become more hands off, which is more similar to a lot of consumer purchasing. So, do you have any advice for someone who wants to try to create that emotional connection with a business?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a marketer, you have to think about the buyer experience all the time, right? But what people fail to remember is that it's decision making in businesses is way more critical than it is on a consumer level. And marketers and B2B tech want to talk, business talk, and I think they don't want to delve emotionally into a lot of things. I mean, most of the time, I wouldn't say all the time, but a lot of the times, they're afraid of trying to be emotional in their copy and in their experiences that they build. But for an executive, if he makes a bad decision as a business person, he might lose his job. Where if you buy a car that's a bad decision, it doesn't affect his whole life. It's not so comprehensive. So, I think remembering that you're selling to people. I have this conversation a lot actually because, a lot of like social media, for example, everyone wants to just focus on LinkedIn, in a B2B world. And we don't live on we don't live on LinkedIn like as consumers all the time. And so we want to meet our customers where they're at and with, appropriate messages for the channel, but like remembering that, where they're spending their time, where they find, passion. I mean, I have conversations a lot about brand safe channels that we want to be on and really being careful about what we want to be positioned next to, and does it look bad if we're on Facebook versus just on LinkedIn? And the argument back is, yeah, I mean, they're going to be remembering the experience as a whole, not just one channel. They're not going to just associate with like one social channel. But it's really, I think if you don't get inside of the mind of your customer, then you're going to miss out on like a huge opportunity for conversions. I just kind of rambled there, but I
Well,
think that.
I guess if we double click just a little bit on the buyer now, right? Like for pretty much like all of B2B is not being trained for buying through the B2B tactics, right? Or B2B, let's call it activations, if you will, right? They're actually learning from B2C experiences and then now expecting that their B2B experience would be the same,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because like I'm spending way more time, let's call it in Costco or Whole Foods or Trader Joe's or like things like that, right? Where the experience has been brought to me and then I have a lot of variety and I have a lot of options. I can stroll around. There's no pressure. If I want to return something, it gets returned, right? So now we have this B2C way of life and B2B way of doing business. And that's kind of like what we're also seeing on LinkedIn is because like LinkedIn is like way more like Facebook now than ever before, right?
Yeah.
And actually now people are pushing like, I guess I'll take the blame for this one too. But like, I actually today for the first time posted a TikTok video on LinkedIn, like and I'm not even on TikTok, right? Like somebody shared it with me. I looked at it, I was like, oh, this looks pretty interesting. And then so now you have like other platforms that are more B2C ish, or at least that's where our families hang out in, right? Uh, being brought into the B2B journey. And so there was back in the day, there was like a stat that like you needed like 5 or 7 touch points with a customer or with a prospect before they would even be ready to take a phone call, right? And I think that may be still true, but would love to get to your opinion on this. Uh, but those 5 to 7 touch points are now like over, I don't know, like 7 to 9 channels.
Yeah. We all have to compete with Netflix in a way, like if you think about it, because Netflix was like so seamless. Your experience on on your app, on your computer, on your iPad, like you can pause something in one area and then go to another, and have and pick it right up. So, like, yes, that's important, to be able to create these really great multi-layered experiences, but they have to be seamless. And I think that we are missing out on all of the touch points, from a B2B perspective, if we're not looking at things like Reddit, things like TikTok, things, all the different publications that people want to be on. Back to what you were asking about, like 5 to 7 channels, I think that's a really interesting point, because we, especially in digital marketing, we're looking at all these different, are we cookieless? Are we able to capture buyer personas anymore? And first party data, second party CDPs, all these things that go into building these customer personas, and all the privacy stuff that's happening. We have to sort of pivot a lot. And at the end of the day, I think we have to go back to the roots of traditional marketing, where like, where do we actually, how do we get people to start thinking about us? How can, is it 5 to 10? Is it 20? I mean, there's, I've seen lots of, publications saying like, you need to have minimum 15 pieces of content, for a B2B consumer before they're going to reach out, and in our world, like 15 pieces of content on one subject is pretty big task, when you have 5,000 verticals that you're trying to market. So it's really, I think that's true. The more touch points, the better. And we have to have a lot more channels and a lot more, like a big content supply chain, to meet the needs of all the content that we need to create, and touch on all the different channels. But I don't think that's different than B2C.
Yeah, I mean,
Really
I would
not.
think B2C marketers are really good at understanding all the touch points. I mean, actually, so just so that we know you get to know you a little bit better, like how did you come up through marketing? Did you come up through demand gen, through corp comms, through branding?
So yeah, I have kind of a non-traditional background. So I
That's
started
great.
out, actually started marketing when I was 4, to be honest. And I'm not joking. My grandmother was an entrepreneur, and she founded natural childbirth in the country. And as a little kid, I often helped her with building her newsletters. And my first newsletter cover was on her monthly newsletter, and I was 4. And I remember doing that. So, like, I've always been involved in some sort of like business world growth thing, even from really little. In college, I worked with my family's staffing firm. So we did nurses, we placed nurses, and so I worked in staffing, that sort of. I took a break from like the staffing world, and after college went into the financial world, and I worked, with a couple of consulting firms doing financial consulting, and quickly realized that I could not see myself doing monthly closes and budgets the rest of my life. I really loved understanding the operations of a business,
Yeah.
but I kept on gravitating to how do we grow, how do we make more, and so when I had my son, um, my first son, I took a break from working for about a year, and then I got back into staffing, actually, and started doing. I had a friend reach out to me, and he needed some help with some executive recruiting, and I started doing that for his firm, and that morphed into talent branding, and I did that for several years, and then went into like full blown marketing after talent branding. So it's kind of a weird
Wow.
path.
Yeah.
But I studied philosophy in college, so I had no business classes even. But I grew up on business, so I felt like that was already sort of second nature.
Well,
Yeah, I
this
think
is
the
great.
entrepreneur mindset, right? Like your family had successful businesses, and I think that is very aligned with growth marketing, right? Because at
Yeah,
core, entrepreneurs always need to be thinking, how am I
yeah,
going to grow? And it's more strategic, which I think the idea behind growth marketing is that it's not just demand gen, right? That already existed. It's looking at the bigger picture. It's more innovative and it's more strategic because it's looking for different ways and more attuned to how these like buyer journeys are changing. What I think of demand generation is very plugged into what already is working and how you optimize it.
yeah,
Um, but I think an interesting thing that was raised, and it's interesting, Asher, because you named retail stores that are in person. And one thing that I think is rapidly evolving on the consumer side and also the B2B side is how you kind of weave together in person to digital experiences, right? So Netflix, but also there's Amazon Prime, right? I think that's transformed how we buy and how we expect to be catered to, and not have to deal with a person. I will say, and they purchased Whole Foods, right, which gives you this in person experience. And at my Whole Foods, yours Whole Foods too, Kristin. They have like an Amazon return box where you can just go
yeah,
in and put it in the box, right? So they really are working to integrate the experiences. If you have an Amazon Prime credit card, you get 5% off at Whole Foods. So it's an interesting acknowledgement because Amazon also had tried to do their in-person grocery stores that they built, which I think were largely a fail. Still in progress, is my understanding, but I think somebody realized, hey, this is a different expertise set, so let's acquire instead and then try to weave these two together. But I think this is an interesting topic because, as Asher and I know, B2B marketplaces, like digital marketplaces, are
Yeah.
becoming a larger and larger part of the purchase experience. But you also still have these in-person touch points, right? Like whether they're the sales team or they're top of funnel and it's a community event, right? Like we just had Inbound at HubSpot where
yeah,
you have 11,000 people, many of them who are prospects, coming to have this like in-person experience where you form that connection, but it is just one touch point for them on the journey that's like a mix of digital and person. So be curious if that's something you've been giving thought to as well, is like how do you make sure to weave the in person and the digital?
yeah. I mean, the concept of merging the virtual and the digital and then in person world is super top of mind, especially for all digital transformation efforts. All of our clients currently, I'm not going to give any details, but that's something they're all thinking about. All the large organizations are really trying to tackle that. How do they do that effectively for their consumer customers? Because that is the world. And like an interesting point, I think, and we're all talking about AI right now and how AI is going to transform everything. And I don't want to. I know Kelly was like, we don't really want to talk so much about AI, but I mean, I feel like it's such a thing. But I actually really think that AI is just a tool that's going to enable our virtual worlds more. I'm still not sold that virtual worlds are, like old news. They're so not old news, in my opinion. I feel like the AI is going to allow us to lead these more virtual lives. And so we need to really focus on all the digital experiences, not forgetting that, in-person events are probably where most of the major relationship building happens. We still have to nurture those those in-person relationships virtually, in all the different channels. So I think like I think that's a huge touch point that during the pandemic everyone thought was going to go away, and I think
Yep.
in person came back with force. Just from like a human perspective, we all miss connections. You know,
Yep.
um, and thinking about like how do we actually like I mean, since I think B2B marketing is all about building relationships, just like consumer based, um, and really, that's how you build trust. Like if we could just recreate the referral virtually, like, I mean, the closest thing we have is social media, but it's really about the introduction, and this trusted person who you respect recommended this company to you. And interesting, the company I'm working at now has been around 24 years, and for 20 years they didn't have marketing at all. They never needed it because they had deep relationships that just referred them, and they grew all that way. And so now, like, an interesting, like, we're looking at, or I'm especially looking at how do we nurture and build relationships virtually, but we can't skip that sort of in-person experience either.
So I guess let's ask the question a different way, right? So because I'm actually intrigued, right? Because all the data points that I'm getting right now is that people want to meet in person, and up until, like, let's call it the 1st of September, and I think we're at the end of September right now. So, like, a lot of the partner people that at least Kelly and I hang out with, right, have been on the road for like 6 weeks, and people are already exhausted, right?
Yeah.
They're like, we're done, right? And so if we were to create a really, I don't want to use the word perfect, but a highly engaging in-person and virtual experience to connect with our prospects, right? We can come to customers a little bit later, right? But right, like, what do you think that would look like?
I mean, I think that a lot of companies did that during the pandemic. They had the virtual and the in-person experiences, and I think that I don't know of anybody who did it super successfully, to do both at the same time. But I don't think you can not do both now. Like, I
Yep.
think you have to have that as an option. And just because there are a lot of people who don't want to, have to go, or have, their lives have been sort of recreated around, being a lot more convenient, with virtual options.
Yep.
What would a super successful event look like? I mean, I don't know. Like, we'd have to, like I said, I don't think I've seen that. I haven't experienced it. And I think getting people. I think there was one that had a really, I'm trying to remember what event it was, but there were breakout rooms that were done really well. I think it was Adobe. Actually, it was Adobe. And they had 4 different stages, and then they had in person. So they didn't try to integrate the virtual and the in person. They actually created 2 separate experiences, and the virtual was fully virtual, and there wasn't like an effort of trying to coordinate those 2 things. So that made it a lot more engaging. So everyone had that same shared experience, regardless of if it was in person or not. But you could still, see the speaker and feel connected to the event. I think that was probably the best I've seen so far.
Yeah, I think if you're going through the effort of putting a big in-person event, why not create a virtual track, right? I think as long as you can support it, the content's being created. But I think you raise a good point about doing it well, right? Because in-person events thrive on that human-to-human energy, those human-to-human conversations that occur after the talk or during the talk.
Yeah.
And I think I think the breakout rooms is a good call out, because I think the main challenge for these virtual events, and everybody has the attention span of a gnat. So, like, how do you ensure they're not actually on their iPhone like Asher is right now when he should be listening to me? No, I'm just kidding. But, like, the engagement component.
How could you tell? I'm getting really good at this, where I'm like looking at the screen, but I'm also like,
Thought you were being subtle. But I think that's the real challenge, right? Is not only capturing people's attention virtually, and then adding that engagement layer where they feel connected to it and as a participant, not just a passive consumer, right? Because we're used to being able to get things on demand. Like, I can go to my Spotify, get any music I want, Netflix, get any video I want. So the challenge is, if you want people to actually show up and feel different about this as an event versus just something that I'm consuming in one of 1,000 things I'm consuming. There has to be components that enables you and kind of forces you almost to connect with other humans. So I do think breakout rooms is one way that I've also seen that be successful, because you get a small group where you can't really hide, right? If there's 5 people and people are forced to say have their cameras on, then you're going to feel accountable in a way you're not when you just see like, hey,
Yeah,
I'm one of
not casual.
700 people watching this talk. So I don't know. Asher, I'm sure this is something you've actually given a lot of thought. I mean, you're the CEO of a company that is very much integrated virtual and in-person
Yeah.
events, and is kind of doubling down on that. So I don't know
Yeah.
if you have thoughts on ways to make it more effective, because I think it is a real struggle to fully unpack the virtual experience in a way
Yeah.
that
So this is a good point, right? And so because partnership leaders started during COVID, the first thing that we focused on was engagement. We actually did not focus on monetization, right? And what we really realized was that providing multiple points of connection that were actually connected to a theme were really important, right? And then we're still not done yet, right? So we did tons and tons of like webinars and breakout rooms and this and that and stuff like that, right? And then and then all of a sudden our members basically said, hey, why don't we do a conference, right? And then we did a conference, and there was lots of energy that came out of that. And then people said, well, can we create local experiences that are give us a little bit of flavor of the bigger conference, right? And then we started doing that. And so if I really distill it down, I think companies have to create a sense of belonging, right? And it is more than just use cases, right? There has to be a hero of the story, and the hero of the story has to be identified and amplified, I would say, right? And then there has to be something built around this hero story. And it's not just signing a manifesto and stuff like that, right? You have to be like, okay, here's where you're trying to get to, and then here's why we as an organization exist. And then when those two connect, we should connect more about this stuff and discuss it, because change doesn't happen overnight, and definitely personal change definitely doesn't happen overnight, right? And
Yeah.
so then keeping engagement as a metric, and then building the connection points to increase levels of engagement. And then again, don't have this thing completely figured out, but that seems to be working for us the best. And I know this motion is called community led, but I think it's actually a lot more than just community led, right? It's just like company led, right? And so you're creating digital connections, you're creating email connections, and like all of these things have to kind of be orchestrated on a theme. uh, and then you'll ultimately get to engagement, and then people will just buy themselves, right? You don't actually have to keep like reminding them of all the things that you do.
Yeah, well, I mean, when you create an experience, when you create an environment that you can connect emotionally to people and build a positive experience, that's when you're winning in communities, right? Like if you're having an in-person and a virtual event, the people who are virtual are going to connect just because they're like-minded. They're like their experiences virtually, so they're going to have more in common, and they're going to likely want to chat with the virtual people
Yep.
than the in-person people. So like
Yep.
it's just keeping in mind that you're creating, with community, you're trying to create the most positive environment that is memorable, so that people want to come back. And I think if you just keep that top of mind, I mean, and that means so many different things to different people. Having a lot of different options for people to form their own little community within your community is like probably, I would say, one of the best ways to build positive experiences.
I think the
Don't force people
local
into a track because they want to choose.
Yeah, and I think that localization is actually a really good call out of a way that companies can do that at scale, right? Because, and if we go back to the consumer side, say there's an NFL game going on, right? The vast majority of people are not in person, but you see people meeting up at their local bar to have that shared
Yeah.
experience, even though it's a virtual experience for them, right? They're just looking at the television. They're not there in person, while we have a huge number of people that would be in person. So I think, and I'll say from the HubSpot perspective, they have something called Hug, which is these user meetups that are localized, right? And they're usually led by a solutions partner or just a super user of HubSpot, essentially, someone who's like the admin. And they're all local. And HubSpot has created kind of the framework and the platform for it, but we don't get very involved on the local execution of it, which I think is a really powerful way to connect people and scale and potentially enable that event experience that maintains an in-person element to it, because you're a local group meeting up together to consume the same information, which is different than trying to get people to engage with each other virtually, which sometimes that's just going to be the only tactic, right? If you live in rural Iowa, there's probably not a local meetup for you to go to, but I think that localization is a great call out, that B2B companies can do that at scale. And I agree with you. Actually, the community-led growth term can be misleading, because it can imply that the company doesn't need to provide the platform and the structure for it, which I think ultimately, to be a successful business, it does. Like when you look at open source projects, often they are truly organically community-led. But at the point that they get super successful, you find a company like, say, Redis Labs comes along and to commercialize it and to put a structure around it, while continuing to kind of leverage the community and have that community grow. But the moment it becomes a business, there has to be that kind of platforming of the experience.
Yep.
Yeah, I think a really great example of people who do that really well are multi-level marketing companies. And I mean, people hate them like a lot. You
It's
know?
just about to be like, okay, we went there. Next, we're going to talk about Grant Cardone, you know?
You know, they do that really well, I feel like, as an industry.
I mean, one of the persons who's done an excellent job of community is actually Tony Robbins. Like, if you go to one
Oh,
of his events,
totally amazing.
it's incredible.
Yeah.
Like the guys can literally talk nonstop in a sequenced with sequence collateral, right? Content for like 8 hours or so, and then it's extremely, and you know, like everybody said, there's this stigma, right? You go to a Tony Robbins thing, you must be like lame, you know, you probably need
Yeah, you're looking for, yeah.
psychiatric help and stuff like that, right? And you know, me being curious, I just went. I was like let's just go check it out, right? Like, what is so special about this, right? That stadium was full,
Yeah.
and people were energized, and Tony was like completely human in that, like he would walk around the crowds and take questions, and there were some people that were extremely pissed off, and then he would just say like, look, like let's work through this, like, and they would like workshop this problem live.
Interesting. Well, I've never been to one of his events, but I have never met anybody who has negative things to say about him
Yeah,
at
the
all.
production quality of this thing, and I was like, you know, to me, I didn't go to grad school. It's a public known thing, right? So I just study organizations, right? And why are organizations successful at what they do, and what type of an experience are they creating? And so I just went. I'm like, oh, okay, here. And I had a friend, Jordan, who was like, hey, I really would love for you to go do this with me. And I'm like, sure, like I'll go with you. And then when I stepped in to I think it was at the SAP Center here. When I stepped in and I started just observing, I'm like, wow, this is like set up like a concert.
Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
I've heard as well.
And then the ushers were like knew exactly how where to guide people, and then they were like, and there were people in the audience that were like, hey, so if you are struggling with X, then there's a Y, and they had like this whole upsell mechanism built out, right, and stuff, and it was a production, like it would be technically a B2C conference, but it was.
There's
If
another example, though, of where B2B event marketers and field marketers could learn from the production quality, and I
yeah,
think that
it was amazing.
it doesn't happen, but it would be instructive for them just to go and to look at the ops side of it and the production quality, but also, to your point, the engagement at scale, right? I'm assuming there was a tons of people there, but it sounds like he was able to create a sense of connection and engagement with the audience,
Yeah.
which that is definitely something that I think B2B companies could learn more. And I think that MLM is a great call out. Like, let's leave aside how some people have the ethical issues around it, but a lot of those organizations have done a great job of that localization and of engaging people at scale, and having people who, quite frankly, aren't necessarily seeing a huge financial benefit feel connected, feel engaged, and to actually care.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is lessons to be learned for B2B companies on how you connect with your prospects, connect with your buyers, so that you essentially have primed them for the salesperson to be wanting to buy, essentially, right? Even if you don't win out on price or product features, but they have such an emotional connection with you.
You've inspired them. That's what Tony Robbins does. He inspires people, he makes them believe. And if we could recreate that in a B2B world from like a webinar, let's just like very simply, we're having a webinar, and then afterwards you have your highest chance of converting to a sales opportunity. If you don't execute it well, people are going to go away not, inspired. But it's building that expertise and inspiration. You have to infuse that in every single like marketing avenue, B2B, B2C, whatever it is. But Tony Robbins is a master at it. I would say, I don't hate multi-level marketing, because I think that a lot of people have benefited, especially women, and they've been able to build their own businesses and learn about marketing themselves. The whole marketing training opportunities in in multi-level marketing are immense for somebody who doesn't have schooling or training, and it's led by the community, who believes in and rallies around a product. So building evangelists is never a bad thing.
So I think I just want to share something because I think it's actually a pretty cool thing, and I've been waiting forever to kind of share this thing, right? Like,
the expectations are big now.
I know. I'm like now this is like, because we're naturally coming to a point where like the B2B buyer's experience, right? Basic, right? And if you think about it, right, like all the famous analysts and the consultants all talk about like people, process, technology, data, right? Like that's
Yeah.
the framework, right? It's the triangle, the framework, right? And if you think about it, and I always sometimes think about like, hey, if I was CRO today, what would I do, right? Like what would my bag look like? Because a CRO's job is to create more products to sell. A VP of sales' job is to kind of drive rigor and create all the process of selling and stick to it. But the CRO's job is to like optimize revenue and then create more selling opportunities, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that his team just goes sells, right? And so I always think about like, hey, so if we just take this simple thing as people, process, technology, data, which is one of the most well-known frameworks out there, and you think about like what B2B companies do, they focus a lot on the technology and data piece, right? And then they'll kind of say like, hey, the people and process piece is like somebody else did it, and then they'll go pay a bunch of analysts to like kind of do the people and process work for them, and then the result becomes a problem, and then voila, the B2B tech company is the savior because that's the solution to the problem, right? Now, here's a different way to think about it, right? Say I want to sell to CIOs, right? Then I think if I'm building a modern company, and we may have a little bit of conflict with venture-backed returns on this one, right? But let's see how you both like this, right? If I want to build a modern company, it's my job now to think about CIOs that are ICs, CIOs that are managers, CIOs that are VPs, CIOs that are CXOs, right? And if I'm starting, I want people to transact with me. They may not transact with me on buying my software today, but I definitely want them to transact with me, right? And the big things that all those people face before they buy a product is kind of in the people and process bucket, right? Because managers are trying to figure out, how do I manage my team better, right? How do I get productivity, right? VPs are trying to figure out, well, how do I create repeatable processes at scale, right? And so But B2B tech companies don't offer any products to fix those problems, right? And uh, and I'm pretty much going to get called out by Kelly for this being a selfish plug, but like the and it's just warning this because when it comes, people know, okay, like, we've known each other for a while now, but the but 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 if B2B companies start selling like things like community licenses, for example, right, or professional development licenses that are not their own academies, because like people don't like a company's own academy because they're like, well, they're just going to pitch me on the product again.
Just gonna call out that HubSpot Academy has tons of loyal fans and
I'm
does a
sure, I'm
ton
sure,
of
I'm sure, I'm sure
activity
they
for
do.
HubSpot.
I
Like, yeah,
actually love HubSpot.
I'm sure they do. I'm like, and you may be the exception to the rule, which makes the rule correct, right? But the key is like, what if like people were like, hey, okay, you know what? You get on the phone with the prospect, and they're like, hey, like, do you have this problem of like selling more to CIOs, right? And then you're like, yes, I do, but I'm not ready to buy that. And then you're like, well, where are you struggling? And they're like, well, the way I'm struggling is I want to like really figure out like, how do I organize my teams? And then you're like, okay, well, I guess let's fix that problem first. And I have a product that is like a assessment with a expert that you can get. And by the way, it's like $5,000, right, to buy, right? And then here's all the things that you get. And then once you're there, then I will actually have something on the process side, and then I'll have something on the technology side, and then I'll have something on the data side, and then like this whole thing comes around and round and round, and then you are really nurturing an industry versus just getting a sale done immediately, right? So I don't know what the sales gurus would think about this, but I've always thought that like the CRO buckets are so full of like products on the technology and data side, but if they actually had complementary products on the people and process side, that they would actually win hearts and minds.
I mean, I think you're talking about like, uh, business agility more. And there are a lot of companies that do sell that as a concept and as a service. And yeah, it's really how do you work more efficiently? How does your organization, how do we like integrate the tech and the people? And I think that's a really interesting whole line of work, to be honest, especially in tech. Because
Have you ever gone to I mean, I'm sure you're a marketing leader, you get pitched a lot, right? And they're like, hey, I just don't have the problem that you're saying, but I have this other problem, and it's a little bit more the people and process side. And the tech company is like, oh, I'll just come back to you in 6 months, right? Versus
So
being
it
like,
seems like
I have something for you.
well, you're proposing a partnership at that juncture, though, right? You're suggesting an external company vendor community is being recommended to solve the early problem.
Totally. And how we commercialize that arrangement is like a different thing. But I'm just like, I don't think people even think like that today, where they're like, I just need to get a transactional relationship going.
Because that requires this deep work that we were discussing earlier in the podcast, which is really understanding the hero of your story, which is essentially the customer, right? And so I think you were saying, what would sales leaders think of this? I think if you can prove to them that this is removing an obstacle that will result in an early purchase, they're going to be totally on board, right? I think what your point is, they're not thinking that way today. And nobody's done the work in the organization to have properly identified that this is what is causing these 6, 12, 18 months delays while the person kind of flails around to solve the problem that needs to be solved to become a buyer. Yep. So
offering that sort of problem framework. Actually, I think a lot of tech executives or just CTOs, CIOs, they often don't know what the problems are, right? They're in it. You know what I mean? So having some objectivity and having some outside eyes on something and being able to have somebody walk you through your, what your problems are and show you like an organized way of approaching them. Recently we were talking about like digital transformation is a big issue for so many companies because they're operating on really old tech that they need to, modernize. And so it's overwhelming. Like some of our customers have, thousands of apps on top of their systems. And it's like, where do I start? And we've seen like traction with we can help you figure that out. Here's our process. So as part of like our marketing, it is talking about the process, showing that we have expertise in figuring out the process, or just identifying the pain point. We have a whole anyway, like this organization that I work with has a framework on how to identify the problems, and that's like a huge opportunity for I think a lot of tech companies.
And I think that marketing that we were discussing earlier in terms of tapping into the emotional side, right? I think a huge part of that exercise is being able to articulate the problem in an emotional way, the pain points around it, because to your point, so many times people are living it, they don't even articulate it to themselves properly. But if you do it right, when they hear it, it resonates with them on an emotional level, and they're like, you're right, I am experiencing this nightmare of having 5,000 systems, many of them which were built decades ago. Yeah. And I think even just putting a name to the problem can cause that emotional connection, right? And a sense of gratitude that you've been able to articulate something that's frustrating, but they've just been that's just their day-to-day work, right? Like many times people have been working in those companies themselves for 15 years. So it's just a given about their life. So I think that ties in nicely to that. How do you create that story, and what are different ways that you can leverage the emotions in the B2B buyer?
Yeah, and how can you prove that you're capable and build the trust? If you can identify the pain point, and you can, that's an old marketing technique, right? We cause pain, we recreate the pain so that we can show you we can solve it, and we relieve that pain, and that's like a very powerful marketing tool.
And then the flip side is painting the end state, right? Like, hey, first we're articulating the pain, we're showing you how we can fix it, and then here's how you're going to have a glorious life, whether that's be promoted, no more like crazy workflows for yourself. Like, it depends on what it is, but I feel like those are the key components to striking that emotional chord and understanding your buyer enough to know what are their core goals and what do they feel emotional about, right? Because it might not simply be their job's KPIs. It might be something bigger or deeper or to the side that they care about in their professional life. So I think doing the work to understand that is where it all starts.
Making them the hero in their story, yeah, absolutely. They didn't even know that was a possibility, like that they could solve the pain of the world. And I think chief revenue officers, going back to what you said, Asher, I think it's a really interesting point. We're seeing a lot of, like, if I've been a growth marketer, B2C is very common. It's not so common to see growth marketing as a term in B2B, but it is becoming a thing. It's slowly becoming a thing because that's that melding of the two worlds right there. And being able to tell that story and to put people, into the hero, customer-centric messaging, not just here's what we can do for you,
or talk about us. That's the most common mistake that brands make, right? Is they just go on and on about themselves and their product, and it's like
constantly.
You should not go to someone's website and it's just all about you. The hero should be the front and center, which is the customer, and their journey should be on your website. But it's very hard for B2B companies to understand that.
It's so hard to convince people that that's how it should be. It's so hard. Every organization I've consulted with over the last 10 years, I've had to really push this concept because they want to sell. They're billboard mentality. Here's what we want. We need to show what we're doing. How do we do that? No, and like I think as a consultant or a leader in an organization, you have to convince people, knowing that that's how it works. That this is effective. This is getting people to trust you, and really you show that you know how to solve their problems. Getting to the next step, essentially, whether it's the shopping cart or the sales meeting. Like, either way.
All right. I know. I mean, almost all these conversations can go on for like hours and stuff like that,
Yeah.
and like maybe we need to do like a podcast day or something like that, and then just like have these conversations. Like have 8 people in a massive podcast, and whoever has to go take a meeting, they go take a meeting, they come back, right, and stuff, and
Just one
we still
long
have
12-hour conversation.
Exactly. I mean, that could be a pretty cool.
That's a really good idea. You could do that.
And then we're like, here's a virtual event, guys, and then come meet us at like the at Dreamforce or something, or sorry, and inbound, and we'll do like this inbound meetup, like how's that, right? And so
Thanks, Asher.
exactly.
Let's go to SaaS Connect next.
Exactly. Let's go to SaaS Connect next. I mean, hey, I'm cool, like I'm down to go to anywhere where cool people hang out, So
I know. Likewise.
All right, well, Kristin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah,
and we'd love to stay connected with you as we explore more and more growth marketing on this podcast. And is there anything in closing that you'd like to give a shout out to or tell our audience?
I'm sorry, I can't think of anything. Can you cut this part out?
That's okay.
No, I think just as we see these two worlds, continue to combine, I think if you're really wanting to compete in the world, I think you have to start looking at marketing as not one or the other. It's really about your marketing to humans.
Totally. Super. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Have an amazing weekend.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you for listening to Unlearn. Subscribe wherever you listen and visit unlearnpodcast.com for the transcripts.